I just want to welcome you guys here to another Patreon exclusive hangout. I'm joined here with Ryan K. Lindsay and Julian Darius, and we're going to talk about Daredevil tonight. So, hope you guys are really excited. I'm excited. Julian's was able to make it this time without any technical difficulties, but life happens. So, sorry about that again. But we'll just get this on the road. As the hangout proceeds, if you have any questions, be sure to forward them to me via email or through the chat thing in the hangout feed, and we'll just get this on the roll. We'll just get this going. So I'm just going to turn it over to Julian and Ryan. Welcome everyone. It's good to see you guys, and let's talk about this book.
Yeah, the devil was in the details, examining Matt Murdock and Daredevil. And so thanks for being here, Ryan. It's
my pleasure.
To get to see and talk to you.
It's embracing Daredevil fans across the globe. It's fantastic.
Yeah, amen. And we've had a lot of positive feedback on this book. And
brilliant.
I guess the first question, apropos of the title, is why was it important to put Matt Murdock and Daredevil in the title there?
To put them both into the title?
Yeah.
I don't know, because for me, Matt Murdock is the more interesting one. Daredevil just goes out and kicks the little ass or whatever, but Matt Murdock is fascinating, like as a man. I mean, that's what draws me to the book. I mean, that's what draws me to most superheroes. It's rare that the actual spandex one is more interesting. Like if you look at when we talk about the new Spider-Man and how interesting he is, they talk about Miles Morales. Like he is the interesting factor. When you talk about original Spider-Man, you like Peter Parker. Like it's the people behind it. But Matt Murdock, and I can't remember if I slipped this line into the book, but I say it all the time, he's the greatest, the most tragic figure in modern literature. And I count that across all genres. Like I find him beyond fascinating in a way that you don't get to see often in characters, because we've got to see 50 years of his stories, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, I agree with you. And maybe you could talk about how the book got started.
Oh, man. Jeez. It was Tim Callahan. Tim Callahan, our good friend, who has backed me a lot in a lot of my analytical writing. He's a gem. And he's done some books with you guys at Sequart. And he got me a gig reviewing at CBR way back when. It was really random. It was obviously the early days of Twitter, because I saw he was leaving CBR, and I was like, oh, I've been writing stuff. Like, how would you go about applying for that gig? And he was like, oh, I'll put in a word for you with the managing CBR editor, and I got the gig. So I was writing reviews there for 2 years. And through doing that, I remember Tim said to me the two things. He was like, your work's good, but it's also consistent. Like it wasn't sporadic. I wasn't disappearing for 3 months and then writing like one piece. Like I treated it like a little job, which is kind of fun. I think that's how you get better as a writer. And so through that, I'd been talking to Tim, and I'd actually originally got an idea about talking about the many facets of Batman over time, and the fact that he's been so many different archetypal characters. And as interesting as that would be, I'm sure it's been done to death, but Daredevil is my favorite character. And in talking to Tim about the idea of, oh, do you reckon, Sequart to go down for it, blah, 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 eventually he just said, look, you've got this other Daredevil idea. That's a nice niche market, but you are passionate about it. Get together, a few ideas and talk to Mike and Julian and see what we can get. And yeah, I remember contacting you guys, and it must be like 2012 at this stage, because the book launched in 2013. So yeah, it must have been about 2012, and I contacted you guys, and very hat in hand was like, I have an idea, and I fumbled it out in email. And you guys are fantastic, and I remember you guys were like, look, get us like a breakdown of all the different possible ideas you'd love to see in this book. And I mean, it's Daredevil. There's a million things I'd love to analyze, and we didn't get through all of them. But you said, write a sample essay, because I'd sent you guys some links to some things I'd done, but you wanted to see how I could write for you guys. And so I put together what is my Blind Dates and Broken Hearts essay. And so my sample essay for you guys, I think, clocked in originally at about 23,000 words, which I don't think is a smart way to get something something maybe a touch long. It may have been a little silly, but it was great. And you guys, I think what helped me was you guys couldn't look at it for ages. And I think in the end, you guys felt so bad that you kept making me wait that you were like, yeah, we'll do your book. Oh, God, we feel terrible. So
No, 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 no. I mean, we do have a reputation for sort of it's not so much procrastinating, but because it's just me and Mike, it's like a mom and pop, and you know, stuff gets you know, shunted around. It's hard to keep up with things. But
yeah,
no,
absolutely.
I don't remember. I remember you know, you putting together sort of like a list of subjects, and I liked your long chapter. And we talked with you about like, will all the chapters be this long? But we loved your list of subjects. It was like, yeah, I mean, it was clear you're passionate about the book, and you know that's something that we always look for is you know the passion.
Mm. It's the sort of thing I don't think you can write any book for Sequart if you're not like dying to write a book for Sequart. Like,
Yeah.
not a
Well,
hard
I mean,
task.
you know, writing a book about comics, you know, it's sort of a niche market of a niche market. You know,
Hugely.
hey, are you in the mood for a 300-page study of comic books? You know, yeah, you really should love it, and it was clear that you loved it, and I know how much you love not only Daredevil but the medium of comics.
Yeah, absolutely. I like all the Sequart books, but I liked selling the book at cons because it is a really, really tough sell, except for when you make a sale, and then it's such an obvious sell. The person walks up and goes, "Wait, what's this?" Hell yeah, money in the hand, like, and that's what I like. And it's not about selling a million of them, although I would love to. It's about selling them to like 100 passionate people. And I'd said this to you a million times when we were getting the book together. If I wasn't making this book, I would be dying for this book to get out. I would be killing people to get my hands on a copy. Like I would need to track it down and read it. And that's kind of what made me want to do it. And so, yeah, when somebody comes up to my table and they're like, oh, yeah, and they're flipping through my comics and things like that, and then they get to that and they open up and it's just words and they're like, what is that? Where are the pictures? But then they realize what it is. When it hits a Daredevil fan, oh, man, it's through the roof. It's one of the best sales I can make. It's really cool because you can sell a comic to somebody who's interested in comics and then maybe they'll go home and like it or not. But when you sell the Daredevil book to somebody, you know they're like reading it on the way home. You know they're loving it. And there's something really cool about that deep connection that you get with the people who pick it up. So it's been a fun book to rep. But they're hard to sell. Like it's, as you said, you like reading comics. You like that it takes like 5 minutes to read a comic. Take a few weeks to read this tome about it, and they're like, nah, nah, nah. And a lot of people just want to read comics and not study them, which actually took me a while to realize. Because I write comics, so I read them to study them as well. But I've always done that with all media. I find that stuff fascinating, and that some people would be like, I had one guy in Emerald City. We just launched the book. I'm in Seattle. This guy walks up dressed as Mark Waid's Daredevil. So he's like the red hair. This dude got his photo taken with Mark Waid, was in the back of Daredevil. He's dressed in the I am not Daredevil thing. His hair's naturally that color. He's got the cane, and he walks up, and I'm like, dude, man, Daredevil, you were like in the comic last week. You like cosplayed last month's like issue. And he was like, yeah. And I was like, check out this book, man. I've written all about Daredevil. And he goes, oh, yeah, cool. And then just walks away. And I was like, you a fake Daredevil fan? Like, oh, it was ridiculous. I can believe it. So, yeah, sometimes that happens. And it's like people love the character, but they don't want to study it. And so for those who do want to study it, I assume that like their copy of the book is like worn out and they'd have like post-its in there and shit. So, yeah, it's pretty wild. It's a weird, I think it's a weird thing to do.
Yeah, I think so too. And I was like you, I didn't really realize that. But your experience is exactly ours at cons, that, you know, you go through kind of like the demoralizing 10 people pass by and they say, oh, what's this? No pictures, whatever. They don't really understand it. But I sort of come from the same culture as you, that, you know, I loved letters pages. I mean, and I loved, you know, an issue, a new series would start, and the editor would talk about the history of that character, or, you know, the history of, you know, why they were launching a new series. And I love the editor's footnotes that were like, oh yeah, you know, this happened 200 issues ago. You know, and fanzines and all of that. I mean, to me, studying comics was just kind of part of reading comics.
Yeah, absolutely. As you said, like editors' notes, things like that. I used to love. I used to go through my oldest brother. He's 10 years older than me. So as a late teen, he had like all the Stephen King books. And I used to just flip through them and read like Stephen King's writing before and after the novels because I found that stuff fascinating. And he'd talk about how he got into the story and how he broke it down and things like that. That's why I always write back matter in my comics. And so this book is just like 300 pages of back matter. Like it's just diving deep on the one topic we love. And so, yeah, it's really I really like I like people that come back to me after having read it. That's always really cool. But they're like, oh, I was reading about Awful Grace, and that'd be a good story. And I'm like, yeah. Sometimes you got to think about these things. And I don't know. I think for like you and I, in writing it, we get to appreciate it better. It's very rare that I like choose to write about something and then hate it by the end of it. I don't know. Have you found that? Have you ever been like, oh, I'm gonna read like this dark side story and then it sucks after you really analyze it?
I do find that stuff that I thought was bad, I will write about sometimes, and usually it is worse than I remember. You know, usually, yeah, there was a reason why I didn't like it, and kind of the years have mellowed me, and I go back to read it and I think, oh wow, this is a mess. I was not wrong here. And the stuff that I like, yeah, usually I go back and I think, oh wow, you know, I like actually seeing how it's constructed, like you were saying. You know, a lot of people complain about the idea that we kill to dissect, and you know, they will say having criticism kind of kills their fun. And I don't feel that way as a writer and as a fan. I mean, for me, seeing some minor flaw and also seeing the genius of how something is put together or characters developed, all of that enhances my enjoyment. It doesn't kill my enjoyment, and I kind of don't understand why people feel that way.
Yeah, because I find like I've been trying to get back into a little bit of non-fic writing. I certainly hadn't done any good deep stuff in a while. I've just been writing some comics, and so I've been writing some dialogues with a mate of mine, Dan Hill. And there's an online comics magazine that's sort of kicking around at the moment. It's called Stuck in the Gutters by this guy Leo Johnson. And we wrote a discussion about Fury Max, the recent Garth Ennis thing, and it was really fun to delve into that. And we've just finished another chat about Fractions Hawkeye. Now, I love Fractions Hawkeye, and as it came out each month, well, sometimes not every month, I'd study it. Like, I'd be sitting there, like, I'd read it 3 times, and it was great. But I reread, like, all 22, 23 plus the annual issues, and then as we spoke about it, I would unlock parts of the story and be like, oh, this connects to this, holy shit. Like, and it was great. You would start to see it, like, come together. And I think that's really good about analysis. You could love something, but then when you consciously cast your eye over it and think to yourself, all right, let's really like pick it apart, you'll find these really cool things. And it's like Mike Murdock. I love Mike Murdock, right? Like Mike Murdock, and for those who don't know, it was must have been, I'm terrible with remembering stuff, but I think it was around issue 42. Daredevil. Matt Murdock is about to be outed as Daredevil by Spider-Man. Spider-Man's good. And so to deflect, the genius of Stan Lee says, well, let's say Matt Murdock suddenly says, look, it's not me, it's my twin brother who none of you know, Mike Murdock. And then he what's up, Mike Murdock? And Mike Murdock, he's a jerk. Like, he's calling Foggy Nelson fatty and stuff like that, and he's constantly hitting on Karen Page, because that's what Matt Murdock would want to be doing. And I kind of love it, because you end up not with a love triangle, but with a love square. And in that love square, you have Karen, and then essentially you have 3 versions of Matt Murdock, because you have Matt, Mike, and Daredevil himself. So we have this convoluted love square when it's just one guy who likes a girl. He's too stupid to admit it. So you have this crazy storyline, and eventually, like, Mike Murdock dies, and it's just indicative of, like, dumb, nuts Stan Lee stories. Like, it's great. It's phenomenal for what it is. But then Tim Callahan wrote about it and really opened up, like, oh, that's, like, it's the true essence of Matt Murdock. We think Matt Murdock's actually a jerk. Like, he's not nice, and that's what, like, Matt Murdock keeps talking about, oh, I finally feel like I can relax as Mike Murdock, but Mike Murdock is just an Like, no one would want to be around him. Like, he's just too zippy. He's just a real clown. And so the way Tim unpacks it is like, you know, that's the actual Matt Murdock. And then once Mike dies, Matt becomes this waspy, restrained version of himself that's not real. And I'd never considered that. And so having somebody like dive deep on it, and I mean, Tim Callahan's style is so funny and so sort of, he really like strips it down. Unlike me, who bloats for 20,000+ words, Tim just like slices with a scalpel, and he really gets to the heart of it. He knows what he wants to say because he reads over it, and he makes notes in the essay, and then he realizes what the notes show. And so stuff like that's truly good because it shows you another angle. And I think that was one of my favorite experiences of editing the book, was getting everybody's stuff in and being like, that is a way to think about it. I wouldn't have written it that way. Like, had the book been just my voice, obviously it would have been fantastic. But you would have, yeah, there would have been too much consistency, and I think having it bounce around and be a little different adds a bit more, I'd say, authenticity to the book, because then you can sort of say, oh, okay, this is how the myriad Daredevil stuff that we have lands on the streets. And I'm trying to think of the name of the title, but Jeff Klopp's one about Daredevil being intermediate superhero filmmaking.
Yeah. That
was a fascinating essay to edit, because he goes into it saying that the Daredevil movie with Ben Affleck is an important stepping stone for superhero movies and Marvel movies, and that it has its merits. And I found it really hard to edit because I wanted to leave notes and be like, no, you're wrong about this bit. No, this bit is rubbish. Like, and I've watched the Daredevil movie. I own 3 different copies of it. I'm a glutton for punishment. But I know it's not good. But there was something watchable about it, and hell, it was the only real Daredevil I could get my hands on. But I know it's not, and especially from an analytical, academic stance, I know it's not a good movie. And so to read Jeff's stuff, and he's like, yeah, it's not too bad. I was like, I just wanted to email him and be like, you need to rewrite this to say it's bad, because it is. It's like, no, this is your essay, and yep, back it, that's fine. It could be in quote unquote my book, because that's the point of the book now. We're getting all these different sort of viewpoints on there, so he could sort of look at it and go, it has its high benchmark merits, which I don't believe it did, but it was cool to see that someone else did. So yeah, editing it, and it probably took me, I think, 4 to 6 months to edit the book. Just bouncing back and forth with all the contributors and giving notes and giving them time to rewrite and going back and forth like that. It was a big chunk of time, but to get this in the end, it's totally worth it. But yeah, to go through and just really it was fun sort of saying to some of the people, you know, oh, you're writing about this, or have you read this issue or this mini or this arc? Because I think it'll help your essay. And I think I was in a good position to do that as editor of the book and say, look, I know Daredevil history. You haven't read Daredevil Yellow, you need to get some of that into your essay. And they'd be like, oh, cool. And it would unlock something. So it became a really, I don't know, it was like a little 6-month Daredevil fan club kicking around in my email, which was nuts. It was so mentally consuming to do that. And as it was happening, my son was about 1, so I'm not sleeping a lot. I'm trying to piece life together and things. And to have this, it was pretty nuts. So I don't know how you guys manage documentaries.
Well, I don't have kids. It's a big part of it. And yeah, it is pretty nuts. But yeah, you actually mentioned 2 of the essays that I wanted to talk about, and one was Callahan's, which I love, and I have the same sort of writing style as you, that I tend to be very bloated in my prose, and I want to cover every little detail. And I've always appreciated that, Callahan he's so conversational, and yet he brings the analysis, but that style it's so easy to read, and it's very direct, and it's terse in a way that you and I struggle with.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, he's
and I love the crazy Daredevil and sort of, bringing out the Matt Murdock as jerk, which in some ways he is. I mean, Quesada, later, Quesada and Bendis, and Kevin Smith brought out sort of the womanizing aspects of Daredevil, and even in the Netflix series, he's kind of a dick sometimes,
He is. I think they almost toned down he had like a weird street charisma. Like in the books, he's just like, he's gorgeous. I love him. But in the show, he was like, he just sort of would enter the room and he actually wasn't doing a lot. But like Charlie Cox was fantastic and just like it brought like presence to it. And so from there, yeah, he did. They showed him as like he's a force. That's the thing with Daredevil, and he's shown that over decades and decades. He will ultimately choose the path over the person, unfortunately, and that means that Karen Page has gone under the bus, Typhoid Mary went under the bus, Miller Donovan went under the bus. They all fall in pursuit of what? And that's the thing. Like, it's not even like he's got this specific agenda. He just has this thematic feeling that he wants to, protect Hell's Kitchen, and he wants to, stop crime and do right and serve justice and all those sorts of things. But it's not like the Punisher where he's like, I'm going after every monster. It's not like he's Batman where he really draws from that. My parents died and now crime must stop. He just has this, and that's probably why people keep going under his bus. He's too scattershot. Because you look at eventually when he takes the Kingpin down, and in Bendis' run, and he declares himself Kingpin of Hell's Kitchen, and he's like, all right, well, I've got it. It's not actually a plan. And that's where, like, Luke Cage and Doctor Strange, they all turn up and they're like, all you've done is push your problems on us. Like, your plan actually isn't a plan, and it doesn't think, and you're being narrow-minded for this weird ideal without a specific goal, and that's sort of where he falls over. But I think that's indicative of superheroes. It's a dumb idea that they would just be like, nah. Like, we joke now that America has a war on terror. Oh, what are you gonna be like Russell Crowe and punch terror in the neck? Like, that's not a thing you can do. Like, it doesn't work. Even if you are Russell Crowe. But superheroes are allowed to have a war on crime. And it's like, we follow it. It's like, it's so dumb, and they're so band-aidy with the way that they do it, and it's so cyclical, and so it's kind of fascinating to watch. And comics are all about like not having a third act, and they're all about rotating conflict, and it's all about going, which is interesting. And I spoke about that recently as I was saying, this Hawkeye discussion I did. It's all about superheroes going through cycles, and what happens is you fight somebody, and then you're probably going to win. Let's be honest, that's what happens. And then you're just going to go through the cycle again. But each time you go through the cycle, you'll be changed by like one lesson. And so over time, that's where we get Daredevil being the Scarlet Swashbuckler to eventually being like this noir lead, as they would say. And so they're constantly evolving through like the tumble dryer of fighting crime, because it's like kicking the tire back. And it's great for us to watch. But if you look at Daredevil and you think, where's his end goal? Or even then, no superhero really has an end goal, because you live in a utopia. But where's their plateau? And Daredevil doesn't have one. And I think that's kind of strange. Like, Spider-Man is like a cop, and he just goes around and he just makes the place better, and that kind of is his plateau. But Daredevil constantly wants it to end, and then like when it doesn't, he messes him up mentally, and he'll do whatever it takes to try to get there. But then when it does end, he's still at a loss.
Right.
And I think that's that's why I always thought of him as a tragic figure. He's his own tragedy.
Yeah. No, and I think that your essay brings that out, and we could talk about that in a minute. I mean, I think that you're talking about some of sort of the superhero status quo, and also just the unrealistic aspect of who gets superpowers and decides I'm really angry about crime. Who is so obsessed with crime unless they're a survivalist or a Minuteman or something. But I think that it works a little better with Daredevil, not only because of his tragedy, which Batman has, but also the Catholic guilt adds so much. And I love the overlay of religion onto that story, because religion is a theme in some superhero stories, like, the Upteenth Superman is Jesus story. But, we usually don't really get into characters wrestling with their religion in any meaningful way. And that is kind of core, or has become core, especially after Miller, to Daredevil.
Yeah. And I think it's like it gives him sort of something to balance against. And I think that's the big thing the character misses, is that balance, where never wants to be happy. He'll always be stuck in a sense of guilt or not doing enough or feeling like he's not enough. And I mean, my wife constantly ribs me. She's like, "Oh, so he's blind? That's pretty cool. What a great superpower." I'm like, "Oh, it's more than that." She's like, "Oh wow, so wait, he's a blind guy who can see, like the rest of us, yeah, who can see." And I'm like, "Oh, it's not that. Make me deal. Who's having to deal with that?" I'm sure he's got people on Reddit giving him stick. Like, no good. And so, yeah, as a character, he's like he is. He's really hard to sort of like to pin down. I mean, and you look at they recently wrote that End of Days. And you write like the final Daredevil story. It's not happy at all. Because that's not. He was going until the last punch, and then he went down. Like, that's the. I don't know. That's like the retirement plan for superheroes. You go until you die. Like, it's rubbish. And as you say, in real life, who would do that? Like, if I got superpowers, I wouldn't be like, wow, better go tussle with ISIS or something. Like, there's such big things. How could I better use like super speed? I'd probably just do it to get stuff done around the house. I don't know. You'd like help your neighborhood out. You'd work on a smaller scale.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, everything has to be grandiose with heroes, and obviously that's par for the course. And it may be pretty boring without it, but yeah, poor Daredevil. It's like it's not as if he's got an insane amount of crazy skills, and he is. He's just kicking the tire. But I mean, maybe each little victory for him counts. I'm trying to think. You know that moment in All-Star Superman where he's got the like, and everybody loves it. He's got the girl in the building. She was contemplating suicide, and he's like there for her. I'm trying to think if Daredevil has a moment like that, where he has these little victories that matter. I'm trying to think of the good times.
Well, you know, I mean, the victories that matter are sort of, you know, taking down the Kingpin. I mean, taking down the villain. But then, as you say, you know, nothing's really been fixed. You know, that's, you know, and that's true in the Netflix series too. You know, which came out after the book. Really, nothing's been fixed, and a lot of people have died, and you know, buildings have been destroyed, people have been displaced. You know, what is, you know, I mean, I like in the Bendis storyline the idea that, you know, sort of what do you replace the Kingpin with, but you know, taking his place. You know, meet the new boss, same as the old boss.
Yeah, it's an interesting way to sort of look at it, and that's where I mean, I kind of liked it in our book. We didn't, and you could, everything could just be so sour as you could do it. So we had Tim with his great style, talking about those things. I really liked a mate of mine, Matt Duarte, who wrote "Grabbing the Devil by the Horns," Daredevil in his early Rogues Gallery. Because it just sort of draws you back into realizing we just have, for the last 10 minutes, we've taken capes so seriously and we take their plight so seriously. You can take it as just like crazy, like pop fiction. And so, like when he talks about those early, really stupid, like villains that turn up. And unfortunately for Daredevil, he didn't have a great gallery at all. The leapfrog and the Masked Marauder getting around. They're pretty rubbish. And the good ones he got, he sort of stole off Spidey in the end. But I like sort of to like bring that down, and I guess like when Mark Waid's run came around, and he just sort of kicked on as we were wrapping the book, so he doesn't really get a start for us. When he brought it back to being a little more fun, and you know, the spot in the first issue and things like that, it was sort of a bit more cool. That's not the Daredevil I want to see, but I totally understood why we had to do it, because it could only keep cycling, and they proved that you could only cycle down so far, and Brubaker did it perfectly, which is why I shotgunned writing about his run before anybody else could jump in. I said no, that Michael Brubaker wrote his mind, because they tunneled down into a pure noir ending that really hasn't been reached before, and they just sort of proved, oh, where do you go after that, except to do a reset. And Shadowland, I'd love to reread Shadowland. I wasn't a huge fan at the time. It just didn't come together. I'd be really interested. Brubaker talked about the fact that as he was wrapping his run, he didn't realize he was going to be finishing, and then sort of got to a point where Matt's about to take over the hand, and he sort of realized, I think this is my bow out moment. I want to know if he had plans to go on with that. Like, surely he'd been noodling with something. And then Diggle gets, like, brought in and thrown straight into Shadowland. It felt editorially driven, and it certainly wasn't mini event. I want to know if, like, was Brubaker going to do Shadowland initially? And I've never heard anything about it. It's never been anything that I've seen brought up anywhere. I would find that fascinating, because Brubaker is probably my favorite writer. He's phenomenal with the way he treats the genres that he goes for, and he nailed it with Daredevil. And I want to know, like, if he'd done it, would it have been any different, or did he see like what was coming and just go, "Oh, I'm gonna rip cord out of this one because it's unsalvageable," or was it just one of those things where he sort of was like, "Oh, I've got loose ideas, but I want to go," and then editorial swooped in, and then we got this sort of this massive Shadowland where you have Daredevil as the villain. You finally like really, really go there, and I was keen for it. I thought there's room to go with it, and then it just sort of it felt really logically potholing. I don't know if you remember much of the story, but like they've got the Shadowland temple, and then all of a sudden it's just like beaming like evil through Hell's Kitchen, and everyone's going through riots. And they explained it in like one caption, and I was like, wait, why and where? And it just didn't come together. So once they got to Wade's run, I was like, yeah, dude, like Diggle did the Daredevil Reborn. I was like, kind of do a bit of a reset and give it time. I think like you have to have that sort of like up and down to a degree. I'm just looking forward to it going down again.
Well, and Wade's run has been, I think it's fair to say, extremely favorably reviewed and received. I mean, one of the things you brought up, especially in talking about Matt Duarte's essay, is how much Daredevil has evolved. And, I think that when you look at a character like, I mean, obviously, like, Superman's evolved a little, I mean, Batman's gotten grimmer and evolved a little, but, I mean, you look at, like, the Hulk. I mean, how much has the Hulk really evolved? I mean, you can go through stages where, it's not Bruce Banner, or Bruce Banner can control it, but, I mean, you get back to a status quo. And it seems to me that Daredevil, like you said, I mean, has really evolved from the early days when he doesn't really stand out, when he's, another guy, he's handicapped, but he's fighting... really silly villains, and obviously so much of Daredevil hinges on what Frank Miller brought. It's so hard to think of Daredevil without the Kingpin, without that whole cycle of stories that we keep returning to. And I wondered, if you had any thoughts on that, and if that has something to do with the staying power of Daredevil.
It's the only thing that made Daredevil last. Is the second-rate Spidey, unfortunately for him, and just nowhere near as funny. And so they were clearly at a loss. Like, where does he fit in their lineup? Because as you said, like the Hulkers, you got your anger, and the Spidey, you got your flips and things like this. And maybe if you look at new characters like Deadpool, Wolverine, they've also remained the Punisher. They've all remained very much what they are. But Daredevil needed to change into something else, otherwise he was just going to be, I don't know, lost a little bit. I mean, you even think about then. Smaller characters that just don't fit into a sort of an A-line sort of part. Someone like Moon Knight. He's a fascinating character, but just doesn't fit in, and so you need to do something to sort of shake it up and change it up. And so they've sort of just gone a bit more violent with him, I guess. But with Daredevil, he really was just puttering along behind Spider-Man, and it was clearly never going to overtake. And so, what was the point? I found Miller's evolution of the character, so really turning it into the Catholicism came in, the ninjas came in, the sort of the fighting style changed, and then the tone changed. If you look at some of the violence in the early ones, like it really became something darker. You finally found the spot, and it fit the character, and I think that that's most important. I don't think you could make Spider-Man go that way. One, because he is genuinely a funny character, but also he doesn't have the power set that would fit pseudo-detective stories. Whereas with Matt, he's a lawyer, so that's a perfect fit. But he also just has to fight up front, face to face. Like as much as they have him swinging around the city, which I always think is relatively dumb, but I get sort of how and why they do it. He is the guy that has to walk into places. He's the guy who has to, get down to fists, and he'll hold a billy club, and that's about it. Like, he's not going to be doing things long range. which is kind of cool. So once you realize that he's a character that needs to be a loggerhead, put him into those situations that really, really make that happen. And that way he's not fighting the owl soaring through the skies, he's fighting the owl on the streets with drugs and things like that. It becomes a bit more fascinating. And then it's stuck is kind of insane when you really think about it, that they made this change and then 30 years on, 30 plus, it really it saved the character, and there are still variations on how to do it. Because if you look at Bendis's run, it's a crime story. Like, it is a crime story, just with a guy in red. Whereas Brubaker's actually isn't. Brubaker's is heavily into the superheroics of it. And you think about him sending Matt Murdock to Europe, and he's fighting Tombstone and the Matador, and it's like, and it doesn't feel like a Bond story. It still feels like this crazy superhero story. And then you have him on the streets with Chico and Merv and Ox, and it's very grounded, but then it's Mr. Fear behind it all, and so it's still very much a mask and a cape, and it still has that theatricality to it. It's fascinating that Brubaker was able to balance that, where I don't feel like Bendis tried to or meant to, and certainly didn't need to, but he made Brubaker and Lark made their run just that bit different from Bendis, and believed that it would stand alone. Whereas if you try and do Bendis' run again, it's not. If you try and do Miller's stuff again, it's not going to work. And you think about I always get the two mixed up. There's Last Rites. Last Rites is the one that's like a born again. It's a sequel, but it just overlays very similar themes and tones. You can do it and it'll work to a degree, but then it won't stand out. Because nobody remembers Last Rites. And after rereading it with the book, I was like, "Yeah, Lord, this is a good story, like a really good story." And it's just too close to what Miller had already mastered and nailed. So I guess unless you can do it better, you're kind of stuck. And I think that, everyone's talking about Mark Waid's thing being like, it's back to Stan Lee sort of era. To a small degree it was, but it was definitely better than how Stan did it, because let's be honest, Stan's writing wasn't superb. So Waid had that advantage, but Waid's run also has some pretty brutal fight scenes. It's got cancer. It's bleak in times. It just doesn't seem to drag Matt down. That's the only difference. Matt isn't as sad as he usually is in the other stories. He manages to just be like, I'm ignoring it, I'm happy, you can't trick me into being sad or angry, I'm just going to go about it. And I think that was what made Waid's run, and especially then with Somni and how long they've gone, it's what made the run stand out. I can't imagine when you take the book on how hard it would be now, because there's been so many different sort of variations on it. You have to come up with something that is very much your own, and doesn't try to hit the same tracks and beats as so many who have gone before you. Like, if you think about going on other characters, there's years of just rubbish storylines, and you'd be like, oh, that's sweet. Daredevil's had high quality since like 1999. When they rebooted it, like that'd be scary. I think. Yeah. It'd be awesome though. I'd do it.
Well, and I think there are titles like that. Certainly Hellblazer was like that for a very long time. And then of course after major runs like following Alan Moore on Swamp Thing and things like this. But you're right that Daredevil has always stood out to me as if I list the sort of top 10, top 20 Marvel stories ever. Daredevil's going to have a disproportionate number of them. And I think that's generally a consensus, and I wondered if you had any thoughts about why that is, beyond, sort of keeping things grounded, that, maybe stories that are about Catholicism and, actually, like you said, actually stepping in and fighting the owl on the ground have more staying power, or are able to be about things in a way that, the world's exploding, Darkseid's threatening it again, or whatever, Thanos or whatever you want, maybe doesn't have as much staying power. I don't know.
That's a good point, because when you think about it, I mean, and CBR is great. They always do this like countdowns to the top 100 like stories that are voted by people, and you see like the Electra Saga gets up there, and you'll see Born Again definitely gets up there. Bendis' run usually gets touted in there, and Brubaker's has just started to edge in. I don't know. I think it's because I guess you can tell stories that then can really bring to the fore actual theme and content and purpose, and I think people like that. When you think about like 90s X-Men, those stories were about art and bombast, and they were rubbish. Whereas if you think about the Dark Phoenix saga, it's about stuff, it's about loss, it's about power, and it's about responsibility, and so it really cuts to something. I think with Daredevil, you can do that quite well, and I think there's obviously been runs that haven't done that, but they are able to sort of say, this is about, Bendis and Malieve, their gigantic run, it is about, realism of end goals, and it is about balance in, societal ecosystems and the way that these things work, heroes and villains, gentrification of things. It's all about finding that equilibrium. Even in Brubaker's one, it's about, I always felt, it's about understanding your place and the realism of it, and the impact that you cause. Because he starts to realize these people hone in on Hell's Kitchen because of him. And they cause people to be violent because of him, and that they come for these women because of him, and that he's the single thing. And so eventually that's where he takes himself off the map at the end of the run. You get to really tell these heartful stories. But I also think, and maybe it's because of Miller's run, but the people that come to Daredevil to write Daredevil really passionately want to write Daredevil. He's one of those characters where everybody likes Spider-Man, but if you like Daredevil, you love Daredevil. And so you're going to really bring something to that story. But I always find it interesting, he's always a highly ranking character in polls, his storylines rank high. He never sells above 40,000 issues, no matter what's going on. I don't understand why people are always like, oh, Daredevil's amazing, oh, we're all reading it. Are we? Or is it just those of us who talk about comics and those who are in that same sort of Twitter sphere? We're all reading it, but then people on the street, kids, teenagers maybe aren't reading it, but they're reading Justice League, they're reading whatever X-Men comics are coming out. It's always fine, and I've noticed it over the last 15 years, Daredevil sales have a spot, and it's usually in the 30s. And they rarely sell under 30K, and they rarely sell above 40K, and it's fascinating to see that it's just those. I feel like it's probably been the same people for 15 years as well. We're there no matter what. We're going to follow, and people will duck in and out, maybe pick up trades, and when they hear about storylines, they'll be like, oh, I hear, this part's good, and they'll go back and get it. But he's one of those characters that doesn't really, I mean, as I said, my wife doesn't get him. My wife thinks it's a little bit different, a little bit strange. So maybe some people just say, well, I don't really get Daredevil. And it's, certainly, if a Ben Affleck movie was our only way to relate to it, that's never going to help. Because everyone knows Spider-Man, everyone knows Superman, it's going to jump in, they're safe spots. But with Daredevil, the art teams have always been a little different. It's Somni's style, I think, is quite approachable. But before then, you open up a Michael Lark book, it looks like a crime story. You open up a Relieved book, it's got that European influence. I mean, the best it ever did sell was Kevin Smith's relaunch with Quesada, and you can sort of see why. Obviously, Kevin Smith was at a bit of a nerd apex at the time, and Quesada's art is very, very open. And they sold, at least they started around the 100K, and slowly did off. But then after that, David Matt comes in. I don't feel like there's a Daredevil art style, and I think that's great. I don't think anyone should go on to Daredevil and go, oh, I need to draw like this. Whereas with Spider-Man, you kind of know what you're going to get. There's variations, and I mean, Michael Lark has drawn some Spider-Man. He draws with the Grim Hunt. Obviously, there are always exceptions, but you kind of know what you're going to like. It would be a rarity that you would think, oh, let's check out this amazing Spider-Man comic, and David Mack's work would be like it sort of wouldn't happen. Whereas with Matt Murdock, you can tell a love story, which is kind of cool. You can have him and Echo meet and explore their pasts and do it in a very strange artistic way and make it meaningful. And ultimately, I think it comes down to the creator's love. Like you look at Bendis, huge fan. Mac, huge fan. Brubaker had always said he was a huge fan. Like these people come onto it and they really want to. It's kind of cool. And even when they did the Netflix show, Drew Goddard initially started that show a huge fan of Daredevil. And when he had to bail out, it was a shame, but he clearly put in a point. how they would do it, tone they would try to reach, all those sorts of things, and it worked for the show. It was pretty awesome.
So do you think the Netflix series has changed the public perception of Daredevil, even if it hasn't led to greater sales?
Well, I hope so. I don't know. I didn't hear a lot of people going, "Oh, I'm still thinking about the Affleck movie." Most people seem to move on, and I mean, it was the most watched thing on Netflix for the month that it debuted, and it certainly got reviewed very well. I'll be interested to see when award season comes around if they get any runs. But it was accessible, especially for TV. Now, whether that translates to them coming to the comic, if you read the Netflix, if you watched the Netflix show, I don't think you'd want to buy into Wade's run.
Yeah.
But I don't think people who watch the Netflix show are going to be going out and getting the next issue when they would just be online. I mean, hell, you're on Netflix, you're obviously a streamer. You're going to go online and say, well, what should I find? And if from Netflix, if you jump into Miller, Bendis, Brubaker, you're going to be very satisfied with what you get. And so hopefully it moves the needle a little bit there. And we'll see what the whatever Marvel relaunch with Charles Soule and Ron Garney does. Their tone looks like it'll be a little darker again. Whether we're just not going to see a segue from movies and TV into sales. Like not in any meaningful monthly way, I don't think. When you look at The Walking Dead, what is it up to? Like 10 million viewers or something?
Yeah, it's around there.
60,000 people maybe reading the comic? That's such an insanely small percentage. But I guarantee a lot of people are buying the omnibuses, they're buying the hardcovers, they're buying the trades. They're going to get it in that sort of way. Reading monthly comics it's a bit of a fool's game. Like, you got to store them, you got to wait to get the story, they're full of ads.
Yeah, and for a long time, I mean, especially with the success of the Marvel movies, you know, I mean, the last time a movie really spurred sales that wasn't a Sin City or a Hellboy or you know, Persepolis, or I mean, something that's independent and, you know, I mean, Watchmen was an example like that. But as far as the major sort of superheroes, there's that problem of where do you start, and you know, they just don't seem to translate into bigger sales. But I think in terms of Daredevil, that might be a good thing. I mean, you were talking about sort of the 30,000 level, and it occurs to me that, you know, Miller was put on the book because it wasn't selling. You know, I mean, Miller could do that stuff because it wasn't selling. You know, on a title like Spider-Man, I mean, one of the reasons why you can't change up that formula or change up that artistic style all that much is because you have a status quo that's working, and it's working great. Whereas, you know, a title like Daredevil has this pedigree where a writer comes on and says, I've got to compete with, you know, Bendis and Brubaker and Miller, and, you know, I'm part of a legacy here. But also, you know, I can kind of do my own thing. And Marvel's not going to go too crazy. Marvel doesn't expect it to really, you know, have more than, you know, a #1 boost and settle back down to 35, 30 range. And, you know, you can do more of that experimentation. And I think that there's a sense of consequences in all of the runs that you talked about. In Miller, you know, yeah, that story with Elektra is going to play out. You know, it's not going to end happily. You know, Kingpin, you know, that's going to go to some dark places. You know, the same thing is true, you know, your secret identity is going to be learned eventually. There are going to be consequences. In Bendis' run, there's consequences to beating Kingpin. I mean, and you can do those things. You can't really do those in Spider-Man. You know, you can't really do them in Superman. You know, except for 6 months and then have it reversed.
That is a spectacular point. Like, very, very true. You're right. If Daredevil was suddenly selling like crazy, editorial mandates would start to be stronger. And maybe that's been the saving grace in Daredevil. Maybe that's just the fact that he's never been that big, so they've never had to worry about it. You can experiment, you can do things that they're certainly not doing in other Kate books. He's not this icon. And I mean, even if you think about the Netflix show, it's not like it was Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. on ABC or something. It didn't need to meet that number of viewers each week. Different. They allowed it to them to tell a different story form because they knew people would binge it in one big session. that probably worked to its advantage. And yeah, it probably does in the comic, because I don't know, like, I've never been worried about Daredevil sales. I don't really care if other people are reading it or not. I only care that enough of us read it that it remains. I don't want it to disappear. Like, my other favorite character, or even two, are Iron Fist and Elektra. And I'm always annoyed that they don't get constantly ongoing titles. Both of their books just wrapped, and it doesn't look like they're bouncing back in the new relaunch. So that always sucks. But Daredevil kind of is a constant. He's enough there, and he's known for being a place for personal tales. He's known for being different, and is allowed to be. And you're right. Yeah, I think that that probably is just what keeps him bubbling along, and where these good stories mostly come from. And I just don't think he's not the sort of character that is going to carry a 100,000K selling book. He's not going to carry a major movie, which they proved, and then proved again by putting him as a TV show and giving him a different tone. Like, he's a B-list character. I always say he's a B-list character. He's not on a bunch of merchandise. He's not their biggest selling thing. He's not very well known. He's not visually well spotted, things like that. He doesn't need to be. And I mean, even if you think about him in the context of the Marvel Universe, he's in his borough in New York. He's in Hell's Kitchen, and that's it. It's kind of where he needs to be. I mean, you tell stories to match that. I mean, if you think about the Steve Gerber run, where they had him in outer space and like hanging out with the Moon Dragon and stuff, like, I love it. I love Steve Gerber stuff, and I think that run is awesome. But it's like it's an aside. Like, it's a parcel of its time. It's the 70s. Of course, Angar the Scream is there. And of course it works. And Uri Geller's having a walk on all this weird stuff. Because it has to fit that time. But you sort of wouldn't do it now. But yeah, I think hugely, Daredevil has to remain a certain level. I mean, imagine if they had a second Daredevil title, that Daredevil Dark Knights? Did you read it?
No, I didn't, no.
They got a David Lapham story in there that was awesome. But then they had a Jimmy Palmiotti story. Not awesome, is my critical way of saying it nicely.
Yeah.
Like, I just don't think he's the character where you're like, let's have like 3 books a month. Like, even like Deadpool, you can saturate and just do the same goddamn thing across all the titles, because Deadpool fans are down with that and they want it, and that's cool. I think with Daredevil fans, I don't want to be splitting across the tri-stories. I want to follow one deep, strict narrative, and I want to like take it somewhere. So yeah, I think he sort of fits perfectly there. Which, I mean, yeah, you could sort of think of as a shame, but he's like the equivalent of like pulp paperback crime books. He's just meant to sort of be there and be on the side. He doesn't need to be plastered all over the airport. He doesn't need to be this big thing. And I don't honestly think most Daredevil fans want him to be. I mean, you get to have him. He's not a nice guy, ultimately. I mean, we talked about he's Mike Murdock, he's a jerk, but he's also like, there's the Last Right storyline where Typhoid Mary is a villain, but she's also trying to sort of hook up with him as well, and it's all very confusing. And he hooks up with her in the rain in 297, and it's fantastic. They've been fighting, and then eventually there's this splash, and they're like kissing in the rain. It's one of the best pages in Daredevil. And they go back to a hotel and obviously knock boots, and it's all sort of shown without being shown. And all he's doing is placating her so that she will basically fall asleep, because then she's happy with him. And then he signs as a lawyer. He signs a bunch of papers to have her committed, and then like anonymously tips him off and leaves. And then they're knocking on the hotel door, and she's no longer Typhoid anymore when she wakes up. She's Mary, and they cart her off. That's terrible. Like, that is phenomenally bad treatment. But it's in keeping with him, because you do anything to fit the theme of what he's trying to do, this ethereal goal that he's working towards. I just Spidey did that.
Yeah, I know. I mean, it's sort of an ends justify the means kind of approach that he sometimes has.
We're coming up on our time, but I have one question for you, Ryan. I checked my email and I saw something in there, and so the question is, what do you think of the Daredevil issue where the Punisher has Daredevil chained to the top of a courthouse building, and he's about to kill a mob boss who is innocent for whatever reason, is just innocent, and Daredevil, and he looks at Daredevil and says, you know, I'm going to kill this guy because he's going to kill someone eventually, and it's going to be my fault. So if you want to stop me, you can kill me, but I'm just going to kill this guy. And so that was the gist of the question. They want to know, what did you think of that as far as Daredevil being a moral character? Daredevil, is he a fascist in the same way that Batman is, in that he's imposing his morality on other people? Or is he really trying to back that whole, you know, justice is blind kind of motif because he's blind, get it kind of thing? What do you think of that mix?
I think it's so muddy because I think in Matt Murdock it's muddy because he will sometimes lose control and then he'll start doing kind of nasty things. As I just said with Typhoid, he's all right with doing that, but then he's always sort of bumped heads with Punisher where he's like, you're going too far, man. And it's like, Punisher has a point. Punisher has a real world point. We just killed Bin Laden, well, just years ago now, but like that's the real world solution to these things, whereas Matt Murdock is like, it's like he wants to be holy, he wants to be the nice hero, he wants to be all those things, but he knows he can't be, but he's stuck trying to be a lawyer and a vigilante. Like, he's such a split man, and that shows when he becomes a split personality with Mike Murdock, and he has such issues, and his mental state has been a storyline constant when he becomes Batman Jack, things like that. I don't think he knows what he wants and how he wants to do it. And there's like, in the Lark Brubaker run, he ends up in prison, and he eventually just kind of snaps, and he just starts beating people, and obviously not killing them. And he's always sort of tried to keep that the line that he doesn't cross, but he's not nice, and he's going above and beyond what he needs to do. And it's great because the Punisher eventually gets himself sent into the prison, and it's just like, I'm watching you become me. And in that, the Punisher eventually says to him, I don't want you to become me, sort of thing. And the Punisher's been very antagonistic for years about it, but the Punisher also knows the moment Murdock becomes like him and allows it to happen, that's the moment Murdock is no longer split and will become bad, which is exactly what we saw happen with Shadowland, because he killed Bullseye. Killed because he's back very quickly. Yeah. But it's one of those things where I think Matt Murdock, part of the character is he has to struggle with that idea. And I think that's why people throw the Punisher at him constantly, because it doesn't work throwing a good hero at him. Although Bendis did that, where you know, the troop of heroes come in and they say, look, you're pushing your problems outside of Hell's Kitchen, you're doing the wrong thing. They tried to show him, you know, you should be good, but the Punisher sort of shows him that, I guess he needs the Punisher to be there, but he doesn't need to be the Punisher. And if at any stage he can show that he's not the Punisher, then eventually that will swing him back the other way to the side of good. But I don't think you'll ever get that Murdock swinging one way or the other. Like, he's always going to be broken, unfortunately. So that idea of, you know, which way should he step? I think the moment you step him either way, you lose interest. And you did. In Shadowland, you lost interest. He went full villain. And that's why I like Wade's run. Wade's run says, oh no, he's stepped this way, but he knows he hasn't. And he knows that it's not going to last. And he knows that it's all a pretense and that it's just surface and stuff like that. But when you come down to it, I don't know, there's still story to be told there, I think, which is kind of cool, that Matt Murdock he has no idea what's going to be effective. And so sometimes he tries to help, and then sometimes he, you know, does what he does to Typhoid Mary, and then sometimes he tries to get the Kingpin locked up, but then sometimes he, you know, nearly tries to kill the Kingpin, and then sometimes he tries to become the Kingpin. And whether you can see that is like allegory for us in the real world, just having no idea what we're doing. Like that idea that we're just bumbling around trying to make an effective life. Again, it's probably why Matt Murdock strikes a chord with those that he's practically. Good question, though.
Yeah, and I wanted to. Hello.
They've just returned home.
I want to apologize actually to our viewer watching. We have a viewer watching this, and usually there's a question answer app right now where you can actually ask questions, and so please come back next time and we'll have that fixed so you can actually ask questions and kind of play a part in the whole interview process and this whole thing. But now that we're up on our time, I was just going to ask if any of you guys had any closing remarks on Daredevil, the character, any future plans for maybe more work on on the character as far as coming from Sequart, or in light of the Netflix success? Should Sequart do a book about the Netflix Daredevil? What do you guys think about that?
There should be a book about the Netflix Defenders thing. So we've got Daredevil, then Jessica Jones, then Cage, then Iron Fist, and then season 2 of Daredevil, and then Defenders. I don't know if I'm throwing my hand up to do it, but there should be.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, we want to do a book on the Marvel movies, and we've done some work on that. But, you know, yeah, I think that you mentioned there were subjects that you didn't get to cover, and I think that there's so much room for that. I don't think we talked a long time about the Vanessa essay, an essay on sort of.
One was great.
Yeah, and you know, I find that so fascinating. You know, I've kind of been building around an essay on the influence of Will Eisner on Frank Miller's run that I don't think anyone's really explored. So, I mean, anytime you want to edit a revised second edition, you know, we're more than game.
Nice. I'm glad the invitation remains open. That's good. Well, I mean, even since we've done the book, we've had the Wade run, which is big.
Mm-hmm.
We've had even just the Wade digital mini, Road Warrior, which I think in itself it was an infinite comic, so it really played with the way you read the comic, and it used Matt Murdock's sense. Great, there's a great 3D radar image that you swipe around through. It's phenomenal, and it could only work on the iPad. You've got the Netflix series, second series coming up. His whole time to the whole Defenders thing that's happening over there. The Elektra run that just happened with W. Hayden Blackman and Mike Del Mundo, which to me just sits in the Daredevil umbrella and was one of the best comics to come out in the last year and a half. There's space for all of that to sort of happen. So, yeah, but it's one of those things where like to do the book, like I had to really like stink in. I was reading it constantly, I was reading essays constantly. It's one of those things where. Yeah, I think if we set aside the time, it would be good. Although, of course, there are possible other things that I may and want to write for Sequart. So it's all about balance, really.
Well, and I wanted to mention, you know, I know you're busy working on comics, and you know, I loved your 2 essays in the Daredevil book, but I also wanted you to be able to plug your comics and talk about where you've gone since editing this book, which has been a pretty meteoric rise. You know, we're always glad to see, you know, Sequart alum going on to other things.
Yeah, it's been. I mean, it's been about 2.5 years since I launched our book at Emerald City. You have done a handful of one-shots. I kickstarted a comic for your editor, at the editor of the Crime Beat, who's also a dealer. Antlers, a lot of fun. I've got a book with Dark Horse at the moment, Negative Space, with the Canadian artist Norman Gianni, which is about a guy who sits down to write a side note of his writer's block. And then we continue to make his night worse, unfortunately. The second issue was a week and a half. And the first issue was one of those things where over 2014 I released a book called Headspace, and we released the issues digitally with Monkey Brain on Comixology, and then we collected the trade through IDW. It was awesome. And there's a story I'm so proud of. It's about a sheriff in a small town who comes to realize he's in the mind of a killer. He doesn't know how he got in there or why he's there or how to get out, but he knows that the killer's mind is trying to wipe him and the town out with manifestations of warped memories, dreams, and thoughts. And so it's this sort of grey story of responsibility, and you know, if you could do something, you know, would you? And if you would, then should you? And so it really sort of draws on the sort of stuff that I love seeing in Daredevil. And I love that book. Like, I just believe it's one of the best things I've written. It's this gorgeous trade that tells a story. And right before Negative Space launched, I was reading the PDF like 5 times a day, and I was freaking out. It was like, it was not as good as Headspace, and that, you know, no one ever wants to have that like fear, but I was freaking, and then eventually it's just like, well, it's gonna launch. It's with Dark Horse, you can't make them pull it all or something. They paid for it. So we actually launched, and we got the best reviews I've ever had. Like there's a review aggregator for comics now, Comic Book Roundup, and I know numbers mean nothing. They always make us feel better. And they aggregate all the scores of reviews and stuff. And we were the second best reviewed comic that week out of everything out there. The only thing that beat us was Archie 1 that came out the same week. Everybody loved Archie 1. But we got better numbers, and we got a lot of reviews. We got better numbers than Saga, better than Batman. Like, we blew everything else out of the water. And I was really happy with that. And all it's done now is make me freak out about issue 2 coming. Like, I'm constantly worried. But yeah, that's been going well. I've got a few other sort of one-shots and minis coming up, and I'm talking with the publishers about seeing what else is coming in the future. And as I said, I've been writing a bit of non-fic stuff, just trying to get my brain turning in that wheel again, because there's something I want to write in that sphere as well. So yeah, like if people want to check out any of the comics that I've read, you can always sort of look for me on Comixology, and you'll be able to see a lot of the books that I've written that are there, like Headspace or My Wonderful Fatherhood, or otherwise they can head to my website, ryankennedy.com. That just updates just the most professional, sort of linky type stuff that you need to find. Or you can follow me on Twitter at ryankennedy, which is just me yapping and yapping constantly into the void.
Sounds good.
Awesome.
I recommend all of that.
Yeah,
I'm a big fan.
Oh, cheers, man.
Well, thanks for hanging out with us, Ryan. It's really been great getting a chance to meet you and hear about all the work that you've done. I myself have even tried to write a Sequart book, and I'm still working on it, but having so much in there and editing a whole essay is a monumental task, and just on behalf of me and Julian, so it's a real pleasure that you were able to stick it out and finish the whole thing and actually have proof of your hard labors in front of you.
When Julian sent me the PDF that had my name on the spine, that was the moment for me. I could see the cover of my name, and I was like, oh man, yes, it's gonna be Daredevil. It's gonna have my name, and I love it. I absolutely love it. Like I said, it was a good 6 months just editing, and no less writing my own stuff. And I think I took like 2.5 months to write that sample essay that was half a book. And to do all of that, it had to have been a good year of my life was spent. Really, that was the #1 job I was doing at that time. So worth it in the end. So worth it in the end. Because ultimately, somebody out there is going to be like, oh, I should check out something about Daredevil. They're going to stumble across this book, and hopefully they're going to love it. And as it has so many readers of the book, they're then going to come back to me or to a friend, and they're going to say, well, where do I start with the comics? And I've had people come up to me at cons, go like, where do I, tell me the one Daredevil thing I need to buy now to sort of get in. And as I was asking them a few questions, and I get a feel for roughly what they like, I know where to point them. And so yeah, man, stick it out. It's a long, especially non-fic. It's such a beauty beast. So many words, and you got to be right. You got to get it right. Like, it's not like telling a story set in a killer's brain where you can make stuff up. You have to know the point. Like, you have to know what's happening. So,
and then Neil Gaiman. And then Neil Gaiman, Grant Morrison, and Brian Michael Bendis had this three-way in Vietnam, and
that's only happened, guys. Read your old comic journal.
Yeah, I don't think we'd publish that at Sequart.
It's like, oh, just the way there's so much eye communication that whole time.
Yeah.
No,
well, so it's been a pleasure being on. And to the listener, if they're still kicking around, if they want to drop me a line online, you can find my details there. I'm happy to sort of chat if they have any specific things they want to launch past me.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
And that's at Ryan A. Lindsay on Twitter.
Yeah.
Well, guys.
All right. Well, thanks for doing this. Thanks for being here to our Patreon people. We really appreciate you. It really helps at Sequart, and we're always grateful for all of your help. And thanks for being here. Thanks, Ryan.
Yeah, cheers, guys. Take it easy.
See ya.
Cheers, Sue.